I believe we find things when we need them most, or like it often feels, when we're the least ready for them. I was not ready to fall in love when I met him. I was not ready to grieve when they died. I was not ready for the support from my parents after I tried to leave, time after time after time. I was not ready for the fear that would come when I let myself love again. I was not ready for relapse, or starting over, or letting go, or not being perfect. I am not ready now for what I don't know is coming. Yet I still trick myself into thinking I can somehow be prepared, as if I could possibly harness time and events and predict what's in store, but I can't. All I can do is show up uncertain and dip my toes in the frosty wetness of life, trusting, hoping that the water will only take me where I most need to go. That even though I'll never be ready, a life on the river's edge is not living at all. I hope you'll wade with me in the cold. I hope you'll lay back and let the water take you where you most need to go. Ready or not, I hope you go where the river flows.
I was diagnosed with an eating disorder when I was 15. I'm 34 now. So when I was 15, social media didn't exist. Mental health was incredibly stigmatized, very taboo to talk about. It wasn't something that we were taught anything about in school. My parents' generation, absolutely was not talking about mental health, so it wasn't something that I learned about from my parents at all. Um, and and so I felt very alone for a really long time, like probably for about 7 years. After I was diagnosed with my eating disorder, my mom put me in therapy, but I was pretty convinced that like what I was experiencing was like a me problem and not a universal one or a common one. And therefore, like, how could a therapist or anyone possibly understand me, let alone help me, if this is just an isolated issue that I am having? And I kind of operated with that lens for the next like 7 years, when I started experiencing depression for the first time, when I started experiencing anxiety. I was also suicidal in college, and started abusing alcohol, and really isolating, and just not talking to anyone about what I was experiencing, because I thought no one would understand, and I thought I had to figure it out by myself. And I remember, like, even in college, like I was trying to go to therapy and see if that would be helpful. But I just felt really misunderstood. I felt like there was something really wrong with me, and that I was beyond repair. Um, and I actually, I moved back home after college, or I took a break from school, because I was so depressed, and had actually attempted suicide. And so my mom had come out to New York and was like, your father and I would be okay if you came home and took a break. And that was really relieving to like get that permission and to be seen in such a way that, like, my parents said, we see that you're struggling and we want you to take some rest. So during that time, I ended up working, I ended up traveling, and that was pretty incredible to go see the way other people lived and realize like that a lot of the pressure I felt was not coming from myself. It was coming from Western society and the pressure to perform and do more and succeed. And so seeing other cultures live in such a way where there was a level of satisfaction with just existing and just being and not always doing,
Mhm.
kind of gave me a window into what it might look like to live with different values and priorities. So I started really questioning a lot about like who I thought I was supposed to be, what I thought I was supposed to do. I started writing, like, just for myself, and like kind of digging into those questions of life and meaning, and like where my anxiety was really coming from. And writing became a vehicle for me to like really kind of explore my inner world. Um, and then after I met my ex-husband, he was my boyfriend at the time. So I was probably about 25, and we'd been dating for about 3 or 4 years. And I was still symptomatic in my eating disorder. And he sat me down one night and said, Rachel, I think you're still struggling, and I think you need to get some help. And I kind of felt the same way I had felt when my mom had come to visit me at school, of like, oh, someone else is recognizing that I'm suffering and validating that I need help. And so I went to treatment. I went to eating disorder treatment for 4 months. And it was the first time I had ever done group therapy. So I'd been in individual therapy up until that point, but I'd never done group therapy. And I remember sitting in the group and I was like silent. Like for weeks, I did not speak in group. And that's typically how I was in therapy too. Like I did not talk. And I remember hearing like all these other women share their experiences. And I remember the first thing I thought was like, how are you so comfortable talking about this? Like, don't you feel scared or ashamed, or like people are going to, like, we're going to think something's wrong with you? And then the second thing I thought was, thank God you are talking, because I have literally felt every single thing that you're speaking about. And I've had every single thought. And I've had that exact same experience with my mom or my dad or an ex-partner or whatever. And so to also recognize that like my experience of hearing their stories was like, wow, I'm not alone. And it's actually safe for me to talk about this stuff because it's not a me thing. It's like, it's actually something a lot of people are experiencing. That was the window for me to go, okay, maybe life doesn't have to look like this for me anymore. Maybe therapy actually could help me, because maybe this is something that's been created for people like me and I'm not an isolated problem. So it was really eye-opening. And after I uh, was, I guess, I graduated from that. I don't know how you would say it. When I was done with the program, I thought, okay, I want to help other people the way I've been helped. I want to help one person feel less alone. So I decided to go get my master's in mental health counseling. I studied psychology. I learned a lot more about like kind of behind the curtain when it comes to mental health. And ultimately realized like that one-on-one therapy wasn't really the right modality for me to kind of help people, but I still really wanted to help people feel less alone. And I kind of thought like, well, maybe writing is the way to do that. Like writing kind of allows me to like have that level of introspection and sort of like pulling out what was happening in my brain that I used to feel so much shame about, and putting it out on paper the same way that other women had done in my groups before, with the hopes of like maybe reaching someone who might feel alone and not have access to group therapy, or not feel comfortable yet going into a space and saying I'm here for this thing, but having something to read and go, oh, okay, I'm not alone, and maybe giving people that same window of opportunity that I felt I had gotten. So I started writing, and I remember like January 1st, 2020, I was like, okay, I'm committing. I'm launching my blog. My Instagram is now no longer like just pictures of me doing weird, like I'm going to actually like post like tips and tools and things I learned in school, things that have helped me personally, stories. And then a few months later, I got divorced. And then a month later, the pandemic hit. And it was just like my whole life just kind of like fell apart all at once. And I thought, well, I really have nothing to lose now. Like I might as well just like really go for it. And it was pretty incredible to see how many people resonated with what I would write about, and that just continued to give me the courage to keep sharing more and more. And I published a book. I published a few guided journals. I now write on Substack and my website, and I'm obviously like posting on social media a lot as a way to connect with people too. So it's been a pretty wild last few years. And I feel very grateful to have had the opportunity to share my story with people and for it to resonate. It's definitely not what I imagined. It's pretty, I feel very lucky. So